Hi, I'm Willis. Welcome to my Halls of Valor Mythic Dungeon Guide. In this video, I'll extensively cover the abilities of all enemies you face in a Halls of Valor run. Halls of Valor is a fairly long dungeon, but it's not too mechanically complex, a trait that many of the older dungeons share. I'll be making a dungeon guide on all 8 of the slated Mythic Plus dungeons for Dragonflight Season 1, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Just like with my Shadowlands guides, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and less important abilities in green. Additionally, I will be marking out abilities with their associated counterplay, including magic effects, enrages, curses, interrupts, bleeds for Draktheirs, and poisons or diseases. Let's begin. You start the dungeon by walking across a long bridge to enter the Halls of Valor. The first mob you'll face will likely be the Valahar Champion. The Champion has 2 abilities. The first is a tank hit power attack. It deals a fair amount of tank damage. They also cast Enraged Regeneration when their health goes below 30% for the first time. This grants them 5% of their health every second for 6 seconds total. This adds up to a total of 30% health. That's a lot, and this is an enrage, so you should soothe this. Next is the Valahar Thundercaller in the next pack. They have 2 abilities as well, and I consider them fairly more dangerous. They cast Thunderbolt, a direct damage ability that targets a random party member. You'll want to interrupt this. They also cast Thunderstrike, applying Thunderstrike to a random player. After 3 seconds it will explode, dealing damage and applying a dot to all players within 6 yards. You'll want to isolate yourself for this. Past those 2 packs, there's one more pack before you fight the first boss. This pack includes a new mob, the Stormdrake. You will only ever encounter the Stormdrake twice in this dungeon. They cast 2 abilities. The first is Crackling Storm, where they shoot a bomb which spawns a tornado, which stuns you if you get hit by it, so just don't get hit by it. They also cast Lightning Breath, which is a tracking frontal that targets the tank. Tanks should face this away from the party and eat the damage while using defensive. Upon defeating that pack, you move on to the first boss, Hymdall. Hymdall casts 3 abilities. The first is Bloodletting Sweep, a heavy tank hit that applies a dot. Healers keep an eye out on your tank for this. Hymdall's next ability is Dancing Blade. He throws it at a random player, and it spins in place for a short duration. Just avoid these. And finally, the Horn of Valor. He sounds his horn, dealing damage to the entire party. 3 dragons will begin to surround the room. These 3 dragons will take turns breathing lightning across one of the 3 rows in the arena. Keep an eye out on these dragons, as their sequence of appearance will be their sequence they breathe lightning in. Step aside when the dragons are about to breathe lightning, and move in after they've breathed lightning. Every row will only be hit by this lightning once, so it should be safe after the first time it's been hit. At each breath, they'll also shoot out a few tornadoes, so just dodge these 2. And that's it for the first boss. Past the first boss, you want to make your way up a set of stairs. Patrolling near the 2 packs here is a Stormforged Sentinel. Depending on your route, you may or may not face these units. These Sentinels are not unlike the ones seen in Tazavesh Gambit. They cast Crackle, shooting a lightning path in the direction of the tank. This may last for some time, so beware of your positioning and space usage. They also cast Charged Pulse, where they explode in a 15-yard AoE. It'll knock you back if it doesn't just outright kill you, so just step out of this. And finally, at 30% health, the Sentinel gains a large dispellable shield through Protective Light. The Sentinels are dangerous because of their aura, Sentinel's Watch. This aura grants nearby enemies immunity to stun effects and interrupts. Several mobs in this dungeon have important abilities to interrupt, so under no circumstance should you pull Sentinels with these other mobs. I'm going to assume you're taking the right set of stairs in this route, as it is slightly easier. The first mob here is the Valahar Mystic. They have 2 abilities that can be interrupted. The first and most important is Holy Radiance. It's a short cast where at the end they heal all nearby enemies for 30% of their max health. This is a priority interrupt. This is a lot of health. In uncoordinated groups, this mob is quite dangerous. They also cast Rune of Healing, placing a big glowing rune under their position. Standing in this rune, friend or foe, will grant that unit 5% of their max health every 2 seconds. If you don't interrupt this, pull mobs out of it and stand in it yourselves. It's healthy. Up the steps you'll encounter another mob, the Valahar Rune Carver. This Rune Carver is fairly dangerous. They primarily cast Shattered Rune, dealing damage to a random party member. You can't interrupt this, so just heal through it. Their important interrupt is Etch. It's a long channel where they deal significant damage to a party member. So that makes for 2 important interrupts so far. The last mob in the pack up the steps is the Valahar Shield Maiden. The Shield Maiden primarily poses a threat to the tank. They cast Breach Armor, dealing significant damage to the tank, and reducing the tank's armor by 10%. This stacks, so when you pull multiple Shield Maidens, it could be quite dangerous. Shield Maidens also cast Mortal Hue, a cleave attack in the direction of the tank. This does a lot of damage, and if the tank faces this at the DPS, they might just die, so face it away. As you enter the halls itself, you'll notice it's quite the party in the room. Everyone's enjoying their time with nice beverages. You may also notice a few mugs of mead that you can interact with around the tables. Picking up the mead grants you an extra action ability. Throwing this at enemies makes them fight each other. This can be useful when you're pulling big. Among the people in the hall, you may also meet a new mob, the Valahar Marksman. The Marksman has a few abilities. The first is Snapshot, just dealing damage to a random party member. They have, annoyingly, a disengage in their arsenal through Leap of Safety. They jump backwards and take reduced damage for a short time. Valahar Marksmen are rather difficult to move, so either line of sight them to get them to move, or drag other mobs onto the Marksman's position. Their last ability is Penetrating Shot, a long charge where they shoot a piercing projectile that does significant damage. Watch where they face and dodge this. At the center of the large hall is a new mob, the Vault Purifier. They only ever cast one ability, but they do it quite frequently. Cleansing Flames is a long channel where they shoot out many holy bombs. Though easy to dodge, they are numerous, so you may want to interrupt this as ranged DPS may have a hard time casting. On either side of the hall is the path to the second and third boss. In this video I'll be going left to face Hyrja first. The path is relatively short, containing mobs we've seen before, some Shield Maidens and a Purifier. At the end of the trash wave is a new mob, the Valahar Aspirant. The Aspirant is a relatively easy to handle mob. They cast 2 abilities. The first is Valkyria's Advance. They leap onto a player, dealing damage in an AoE. Just isolate yourself so you don't damage other players. Their other ability is Blast of Light, a frontal that targets the tank. This frontal is lethal to all players including the tank. Everyone should sidestep this. Tanks try to face the frontal away from the party, though you may find it difficult as sometimes they cast it right after leaping away. And now we've arrived at the second boss. Or rather, the 2 mini-bosses that precede the boss. The 2 mini-bosses are representative of the abilities Hyrja will inherit during the fight itself. Let's talk about Solstin first. Solstin is powered by thunder. They have 2 abilities. Arcing Bolt is a chain lightning-like ability that damages multiple players. Heal through this and try to spread out if you can. Solstin's big ability is Eye of the Storm. They'll spawn a large bubble and begin to repeatedly rain thunder on the battlefield. Stay within this bubble and you will survive. With sufficient healing, of course. Then let's look at Olmir, powered by Holy Power. Just like Solstin, Olmir has 2 abilities. The first is Searing Light, a holy bolt that deals damage to a random party member. You'll want to interrupt this. Olmir's big ability is Sanctify, a moderately long cast where they will launch balls in multiple directions. You must take care to not get hit by these, as these are lethal. Getting hit by an orb not only does damage to you, but also to the whole party, so beware. Olmir has a relatively large hitbox, so you don't have to stand too close to hit him. Sanctify does have a predetermined pattern, so if you can discern it, you can maximize your damage output here. It is possible to pull both of these at the same time, though you may find Olmir casting Sanctify while you hide in the Eye of the Storm bubble, which can be problematic as there's not a lot of room to maneuver, so I do not recommend. Upon defeating them, they become spirits and they return to their starting positions, and Hyrja starts the fight. This boss fight involves the abilities of both Solstin and Olmir. The boss herself has 1 unique ability, Shield of Light. Not unlike the Aspirant earlier, she will launch a burst of energy forward. This, however, unlike previously, tracks the tank, so it is unavoidable for the tank. Tanks will want to face this away from the party to the best of your ability, and take it. Otherwise, the boss's other mechanics lie in their connection to the 2 spirits. The fight starts in the center, where upon beginning the fight, the boss will immediately be charged by both Solstin and Olmir. You can see this by the lasers. When empowered by a spirit, she will have the abilities of that spirit. This means when she's empowered by Olmir, she can cast Sanctify and Expel Light. And while empowered by Solstin, she can cast Arcing Bolt and Eye of the Storm. While empowered by a side, she'll also gain a stacking buff, which increases her damage of that damage type infinitely. The longer she stays empowered by one side, the more damage she will deal. Therefore, you'll want to frequently move the boss either side. Let's say we start by pulling Hyrja to the left, where Solstin is. She begins to be charged by thunder and will have the following abilities to cast: Arcing Bolt, Eye of the Storm, and Shield of Light. You'll want to beat her down, and after she finishes her cast of Eye of the Storm, you'll want to drag her all the way to the other side to drop the thunder and pick up Holy. While on Olmir's side, she'll have the following abilities to cast: Expel Light, Sanctify, and Shield of Light. Expel Light is a new ability, a slight twist on the simple ability Searing Light seen in Olmir. Expel Light is where Hyrja selects a player and places a holy circle around them. This circle explodes after 3 seconds. That person will want to try to isolate themselves, and just like with Solstin, after she casts Sanctify, you bring her back to the other side. You'll want to move the boss after every cast of the major ability, so Sanctify and Eye of the Storm. The boss just needs to move past the tip of the points on either side. You can verify this by ensuring that she's only powered by one laser at a time. And that was the second boss. We make our way back to defeat Fenryr. You face a few more mobs in the hall, all you've seen before. Just interrupt appropriately and watch frontals. You go through a portal and are faced with a dragon. You can skip this dragon fairly easily. When you walk through the portal, don't move too far forward, as that aggroes the dragon. Then once the dragon has settled down, you hug the wall on the right and just keep moving. There are a handful of mobs in this area, and the first of which is the Gilded Fur Stag. These are neutral mobs, and they have 2 abilities. Bucking Charge is where they charge in the direction of the tank, dealing damage and applying a bleed. Tanks face this away. They also cast Frantic Gore, where they gore their current target, the tank, applying a dot. Pulling several of these bucks can be quite chaotic, so be careful. Past that, you may face a group of Angerhoof Bulls. It's fairly easy to skip them, just hug the right wall. Their abilities include Piercing Horn, a tank buster, Enrage, where they gain a 30% damage and attack speed buff for 30 seconds, you can see with this, and Rumbling Stomp, a large AoE stomp which deals damage and knocks you back if it doesn't outright kill you. Along the left path are a few Steeljaw Grizzlies. These mobs are relatively easy compared to the others in this area, so most groups collect the count they need here. Much like the Wargs and the Bulls, these bears are particularly dangerous for the tank. They cast Rending Claw, another tank buster. They cast Crunch Armor, a stacking debuff that causes the tank to take 10% additional damage for 10 seconds. Tanks will need to kite to drop these stacks. And finally they cast Charge, charging at a random party member. If they all happen to charge at the same player, that player would not have a good time. With so many beasts in the area, there are bound to be trappers ready to hunt. These trappers cast a few abilities. Bear Trap, which is just a trap. Standing in this trap stuns you and deals damage and applies a dot, so you don't want to step in these. And they also cast Quick Chop, which is just a tank hit. If you do what I do and just hug the right wall, it is here you will likely stumble upon the second boss. This fight is split up into 2 parts. In this first part, you fight Fenryr and bring him down to 60%, at which point he goes invisible, and you follow a blood trail to finish him off. He is considerably harder in part 2, so be careful. In part 1, he'll cast Unnerving Howl first. It's a short cast which deals damage to all players. It interrupts you, so be careful. He then casts Ravenous Leap, selecting 2 players, and jumping to them sequentially. Each leap applies a bleed to that player and all other players around that player. This bleed stacks and is permanent. It is crucial that you do not let these stacks build up faster than they need to. And his last ability in part 1 is Claw Frenzy. They recently changed this to have a cast time, it didn't used to. Fenryr will swipe around him, dealing armor-piercing damage spread equally among all players within 12 yards. The entire party will want to share this damage. Armor-piercing means tanks can't solo it, and melee DPS may be one-shot if range do not share this burden. And that's all for the first part. After the boss stealths away, you make your way farther down the hill. The fight is effectively over, and it allows you to replenish your resources and heal up. On the way to the boss's second position, you will face the last trash mob of this area, the Ebon-Claw Warg. These wargs are dangerous, and you should take care not to pull too many at a time due to their passive Strength of the Pack. This increases the warg's damage by 20% for each other warg nearby. In addition to this, they also cast Ferocious Bite, a tank hit. This can potentially kill the tank instantly without any warning, so beware. However, keeping them controlled may prove to be a challenge due to their other ability, Leap for the Throat. It's a pounce that deals some damage in a small AoE around random party members. While painful, it's not usually lethal, as leaping away causes them to lose their AoE buff. You may want to clear the wolves near the boss, as this fight will require at certain points a party member to run far away. You fight Fenryr again for the second time. This time he starts at 60% health, and there will be a few changes to the fight. Fenryr will generally continue to cast all abilities he did prior. Unnerving Howl, however, will now spawn a set of wolves in addition to interrupting you. These wolves are painful and must be prioritized to kill first. These wolves are exactly like the wargs you find before the boss. For each warg alive, they have a 20% damage buff. Take great care here. The boss also has a new ability, Scent of Blood. He will fixate on a random party member and will seek out that player exclusively. That player will just want to run for the hills, or drop the fixate through some useful abilities, such as Shadow Meld, Invisibility, Ice Block, or maybe even die by the sword. Otherwise, using mobility abilities would be a good idea. The only other change in this fight would be with his Ravenous Leap. He will jump to 3 players instead of 2. Stacks build up faster, pressure grows on your healer. And that's it. After defeating Fenryr, you make your way to the last part of the dungeon. With a wonderful 150% movement speed buff, you make your way up the ephemeral way after cleaning up some trash on the way there. You speed your way on up and are faced with 4 kings. This mini-boss is tricky and can be quite difficult. You can fight these kings by speaking to them. Each king has a unique buff associated with them. When a king dies, they will cause all other living kings to also obtain their power. The fight will start off easy, and as you continue, it will get harder and harder, down to the last king. From left to right, the powers are as follows. King Ranulf's ability is Unruly Yell. Obtained through the buff Might of the Screaming Abyss. Unruly Yell is a short cast, which deals a fair amount of damage to all players and interrupts any casts. Watch out, you'll want to interrupt this. King Howler's ability is Sever. Obtained through the buff Might of the Rocky Cliffs. This is a tank hit that applies a debuff, causing the tank to take additional 20% damage for 12 seconds, which stacks upon repeated application. King Bjorn's ability is Wicked Dagger. Obtained through the buff Might of the Black Storm. They throw a dagger at a random party member, dealing a fair amount of damage and reducing the target's healing received by 50% for 15 seconds. And finally, King Tor's ability is Call Ancestor. Obtained through the ability Might of the Brutal Siege. Occasionally, Tor will spawn an honored ancestor, which slowly walks towards him. Should the spirit reach them, they will be healed for 50% of their max health. You absolutely do not want that to happen. Slow it down with CC like Freezing Trap or Entangle. This buff sharing mechanic means you'll probably want to kill the most difficult ability last, as it means it will be least represented among the kings. Something to note is that when there are only 2 kings left, speaking to either king will activate both of them, so prepare for a finale. Personally, I think pulling it right to left is a good choice, as Unruly Shout and Sever are quite dangerous. Though, doing this, you might want to make sure you have enough crowd control to keep the ancestor locked down. With that, the very last trash of the dungeon is over, and we fight the last 2 bosses. The Aegis of Agrimar is there for the taking, and take it we do. Typically the tank will. Picking up the Aegis summons Skovald, who wishes the right to bear the Aegis himself. The fight itself is quite straightforward. Skovald has a tank hit in Savage Blade, which may occasionally apply a bleed in Ragged Slash, which can be quite deadly. Otherwise, for the rest of the party, the boss has a few abilities to watch out for. Foul Blaze Rush is an ability where Skovald charges at a random player, dealing damage and applying a dot in an AoE around that player. You'll want to spread out for this, so make sure you don't spread out that dot. When Skovald reaches 100 energy, he casts Ragnarok. The person with the shield will want to activate it, placing it down to protect the party from any incoming damage from the front. Failure to do so will result in a wipe. It only protects from the front, so when activating it, face Skovald. The shield itself is a channeled cast, so whoever put the shield up will not want to channel anything else while this happens. Activating the shield will exhaust it, dropping it. This allows Skovald to pick it up. Upon picking it up, he activates it himself, protecting him from all incoming frontal damage. You can still attack him from behind, though you may be more preoccupied defeating the adds that he spawns in this phase. These adds don't melee you, they simply walk up to players, leaving behind a trail of fire. These adds also have a debuff that causes them to eventually die on their own. They lose 5% of their health every 3 seconds. To avoid losing too much ground, you'll want to AoE them down quickly and effectively. After exhausting the shield himself, Skovald drops it, allowing the tank to pick it up again to defend from the next Ragnarok. And that's it for this fight. Just rinse, repeat, and we find ourselves fighting Odyn. Odyn is probably the simplest boss fight here. The first mechanic you'll see is Spear of Light. It spawns a swirly, and after some time a spear lands, shooting out 3 projectiles. You'll want to dodge these projectiles, as if you don't, you'll be stunned. You will often die if you are hit by these orbs, as you can't dodge other mechanics, so be careful. Eventually, after summoning 3 spears, the boss will cast Shatter Spear, destroying all spears and unleashing 5 projectiles that come out of each shattered spear, destroying the spear in the process, of course. Otherwise, Odyn casts Radiant Tempest. He pulls players in, and after a moderate cast, he explodes, dealing lethal damage to players caught within 40 yards of him. That is a long way to run. You might want to use mobility abilities here. Odyn's big ability is Runic Grand, applying a rune on each player. The player's job is to observe your own rune, and walk over to the corresponding rune on the ground. Stepping on the wrong rune deals significant, often lethal, damage and knocks you back. Successfully stepping on the right rune will grant you a 50% attack and healing buff, some movement speed, and will refill your health bar. That's neat. While you're moving to find the right rune, you will be taking a lot of damage, so you might want to use the defensive and move quickly. This is a good time to use Lust. And finally, throughout the fight, Odyn will spawn Stormforged Obliterators. These Obliterators are casters and will continuously and infinitely cast Surge. Surge is slow to start casting, but with each cast, the add casts it more quickly. You'll want to focus it down and ensure that you can interrupt it. As a rule of thumb, 2 adds will spawn before each rune phase. And that's all there is to this fight. Odyn is defeated at 80% health, so don't be too bothered that his health bar isn't moving very much. And that's the whole dungeon. Halls of Valor is a returning dungeon and isn't too difficult, even in Mythic Plus. I make these videos to give players a full overview of the dungeons, as I like to be well informed of dungeon mechanics myself. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next dungeon guide.